Hi, everybody. Regina and Angela here from Women's Personal Finance. We are talking to Miranda Marquit. Did I say that right? Marquit?
Marquette.
Marquit. Thank you.
When you've known
Uh,
someone too long
hi.
online, but
Yes. And we're talking about politics, activism, and showing up in red states. Well, that's the specific topic we think it could be helpful for anybody, regardless, really, of what is going on with you locally. And we've known Miranda a long time. She's very active politically in her state and is also a long time member of the personal finance community. So we've spent lots of time chatting with Miranda over the years and think she is very qualified to help us talk about this stuff. As a reminder, if there is any financial stuff that comes up, me and Angela are not financial professionals. We are just money nerds and enjoy facilitating these discussions for all of us to think about. And I think with that, I will hand it off to Angela.
I don't know if
Anything?
I get anything to add today other than um, those of you who are following us more publicly online or, in our private communities. This is specifically for Woven, but I see that we've got a number of insiders here too. We consider ourselves leftist money nerds, which is maybe a smaller group of folks, but happy to have Miranda, who is also in that strange Venn diagram of people that talk about money, but also, care about humans and the planet on a large scale. So, welcome, Miranda. Maybe give yourself just a couple minutes to
Yeah.
do some background.
Hi, I'm Miranda. Like I said, I've been writing and podcasting about money on the internet for almost 20 years. And I'm a financial professional. I do have an insurance license. So, but once again, anything that you hear we're talking about money is just for educational and entertainment purposes only. It is not meant to be advice. So there you go. There's our disclaimer. I'm going to have one too. Um, so I don't actually actively sell insurance because it turns out I don't like sales and I don't like selling insurance. So I just have a license. It's fine. But that does make me an actual financial professional. Anyway, I am working toward an AFC designation. That's accredited financial counselor. I do a little bit of financial coaching here and there, but for the most part, I just write and podcast about money on the internet. I'm also very active in my local community. I have been the chair of our county Democratic Party in the past. I'm currently our vice chair and our communications person. I've run for state legislature and lost 3 times to the woman who, I don't know if you know this, but Idaho, where I live, the person that I run against, she is the first person in the country to introduce an anti-trans sports bill at the state level back in 2020. I kicked off my campaign by going to the state capitol and testifying against her horrible bill. Um, our state has the distinction of being the first to introduce one of those bills, but not actually have it implemented because our Supreme Court has said that it is a poorly written and unconstitutional bill. So we are one of the few states who passed one of those bills, but does not have it in effect right now. So, kind of fun little fact there. Currently, I've stepped back a lot from my organizing roles. The last time I was in charge of a protest or a rally was in 2022 with the overturn of Roe v. Wade. We put together a really quick rally for that day. But right now, what I'm doing is I am working with, we have a lot of young activists in the community, and so I am mostly mentoring them and working on mentoring the next generation of progressive leaders. We do have, I am proud to say that we are the most progressive Democratic county party in our state. That includes Boise. Our actual county party is more progressive than the county party in Boise. Most of them we call Republican light. And so, anyway, we're making strides. And so I've been focusing most of my efforts right now on mentoring and nurturing the next generation of progressive leaders here in Idaho. Because one of my biggest complaints about the Democratic establishment is those old fuckers will not mentor anybody and they will not step down. So, anyway, let's do it.
We had a number of people die in office in Washington this year. So,
It's great.
Yeah. Good people, but older people. So
mentor, yeah, like mentor and pass on. I actually got into it with one of our city council members because we also have here in Idaho Falls, since Idaho does nonpartisan municipal elections, we actually have 3 of the people sitting on our city council were registered Democrats when they were elected. 2 of them have since switched to independent, but like or unaffiliated is what we call it here. But yeah, half of our city council were actually Democrats, registered Democrats when they were elected because we have nonpartisan municipal elections, so you don't see a little letter behind your name. Um, and then I also just hate the 2-party system, but in Idaho, 2 parties would be an upgrade. So here we are. Okay, so all right, what are we talking about? What do you got for me?
gosh, I think maybe centering ourselves about like where we are currently in this moment. I know you and I were talking earlier offline about how there are a lot of people in our lives that are either extraordinarily uninformed or informed light and continuing to gaslight themselves about how rough things are right now. So I think before we can really talk about like how can we do things for good, I think we need to like recognize like where we're starting from.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is most frustrating to me is the fact that there is a very large chunk of our population that does not pay attention, and some of them choose to not pay attention, and they do not participate in our government. And that is why 32% of the eligible voting population is currently setting our agenda, is because they're the ones that show up. And the hardest thing for me is I do not know how to make people care. And that's something we can't do, right? We can't force people to care. But I think that that's been one of my biggest frustrations right now, is just the fact that so many people, oh, that sucks, Sarah. I'm sorry. But so many people, so many people just do not connect politics with their daily lives. The extreme right has made politics so incredibly unpleasant to engage in that many people just opt out. And that's something we see a lot here in my state because we do have, we're talking about a state that ran off and bankrupted the Aryan nations only to like 3 decades later get a new crop of white supremacist Christian nationalists doing the same thing in the same area again. And part of that is because of that complacency where folks just are like, oh, okay. Part of it too is we assume that progress is like we have a group of people also that assume that progress is being made and don't recognize that we are moving backward. So there's a lot going on. I don't know how centering this is, but
I don't know if centering is the right word as much as like let's be.
But this is what we're facing, right? We're
Yeah.
facing, and to me, I think, me personally, whether I'm right or wrong about this, but to me personally, the biggest issue that we have to overcome is not fighting against the 32% of the population that is basically hopeless in terms of like convincing the MAGAs. For the most part, like, sure, there'll be a few that like deconstruct and come back to the light, I suppose. But for me, the biggest hurdle to overcome is because you've got about right a little less than a third of the country that's MAGA, and they're the ones that are setting the agenda. And when I say third of when I talk about like the country, I am talking about adults who are eligible to vote. Um, so, but you've got 32%, about 32% of them are like MAGA. They're not changing their mind on that. You got another roughly a third of eligible voters who are some lotion, like some portion of in the middle slash liberal slash moving left. We don't have a true left here in the US, let's be real about that. But like you've got about a third of the population that votes, Democrat or liberal or whatever you want to call it. And then you've got a third of the population that is unengaged. And I think our big hurdle is finding ways and how do we reach the people who are unengaged and how do we get them to engage? Because that's the issue there. And so like, and then the other issue is just getting people to, you've got these people that are kind of unengaged and they might engage occasionally, but they only pay attention to the sexy things, right? The national level, right? The federal level. And then give up and say,
Yeah, I want to say that part too. Like,
yeah,
you know, if we could just get the same number of people who vote for the president to vote in their communities, like entire
oh yeah,
situations would change.
right. And the thing that the extreme right has done very well over the last 40 years has been showing up to every goddamn election. Those mofos show up to every primary, they show up to every school board election, they show up to the city council elections, they show up to every election, they show up on the off years. You know, and as much as, you know, my leftists are near and dear to my heart, a very large percentage of the leftist population shows up every 4 years to complain about who's at the top of the Democratic ticket and then do nothing in their local community. Now I'm yelling, I'm sorry.
I,
But that's part of the issue too, right? Because as you know, as I've been saying for the last couple of years, about 80 to 85% of what you hate at the Supreme Court started in a state legislature. These guys have been working on this legislation for the last 40 years. Um, and their faithful foot soldiers show up every single election to put their people in the state house. Then they pass these laws and it goes to the Supreme Court. And um, and you look at our Supreme Court and we end up overturning Roe. And we end up, you know, we might be in a position where EMTALA doesn't apply to abortion care. That's our state legislature. We have two abortion related cases out of Idaho, out of our Idaho state legislature, waiting in line at the Supreme Court right now. And one of them is to say that emergency care does not have to apply to abortion care. That starts in the state legislature.
And Miranda, backing up to your point about
Yeah.
showing up at everything, I would note too that they also don't seem to have the concerns that we do with being qualified. They show up regardless, and I would say that there's a lot of argument on the other side about so if somebody's valid and worthy of a position, and so people don't show up in the same way. And yeah.
That too, exactly, yes. So we have a lot of that going on. And so trying to impress upon people the importance of local politics. And one of the things I started doing about 3 years ago was because I noticed in and I noticed this specifically in our local queer community, but one of the things I started doing about 3 years ago was putting together a little fact sheet, just a one-pager fact sheet that we put at our voter registration booth at Pride that just listed all of the egregious bills coming out of our state legislature that impacts the queer community. And I would have that ready to go at Pride. I made a separate one for all of the things our state legislature did affecting specifically women's reproductive care and reproductive rights. And then I did another one that's just the general awfulness, and you know, so that we can hand them out and say, hey, like this is affecting your life. And one of the things that I did last year when I would go and talk to groups on our local community college campus, they would ask me to come, like they would want to do voter registration, and I'd come to train them on nonpartisan voter registration, which is something I do despite being a partisan operator. When we do voter registration, it's nonpartisan. We don't do as Democrats. But one of the things I would ask them, I was like, hey, who hates both of the folks at the top of the ticket? Like, who feels uninspired by them? And of course, all of them were like, yeah, we hate it. But then I said, okay, well, how many of you guys know who your state legislator is? And like, very few people will raise their hands. And then I'd start going through like, well, did you know that this year in the state legislature, they banned, pride flags? Right? They banned pride flags. And they're starting to look horrified. I'm like, did you know that our state has the one of the harshest abortion laws, and our abortion bounty is actually larger than the Texas abortion bounty? Like, and you know, they're getting really horrified. And I was like, did you know that we have now banned gender affirming care for young people, and our state legislature is looking at banning gender affirming care for adults next year. And so, and they're all horrified, and now they're all registered to vote. But because once you sit down and say, like, no, this is the stuff that's affecting your life. Like, we have an affordable housing crisis here in Idaho, and our state legislature spent 60% of their time trying to figure out how to make trans people suffer. And that's 0.08% of our population, right? Like, here in Idaho. And so, like, rather than fixing the affordable housing crisis that people have been begging them to like work on, we have an affordable housing fund that the state legislature refuses to fund. Rather than doing that, rather than indexing our homestead property tax exemption to inflation and home values, it's capped. And so people, like, we have seniors losing their homes over their taxes, and they're spending the majority of their time in the state legislature attacking trans people. Like, why? And when people start realizing that, that's when they start to, okay, I do want to get involved. I want to register to vote. I want to do that. And so really taking a look at what's going on here, like one of my favorite examples at the city level is we have to replace our water tower. And the city's initial plan was to just like put it in a park, the only green space in a low income neighborhood, and destroy this park with this water tower. Well, we rallied the troops, made a big stink about it, met with our city council people, met with downtown businesses, and got it moved to where, instead of destroying a park and the only green space in a low-income community, it is now destroying 6 parking spaces. And that's it, right? And so
destroy more parking spaces.
exactly.
Right, sorry.
So we're not sad about it. And so that's the kind of thing you can do locally if you're involved, is you can make your communities better. You can make your communities healthier. You can make sure that your state legislature is focusing on the issues that matter. One of the reasons why our state legislature just passed school vouchers, private school vouchers, even though there was huge outcry against it, record-breaking outcry. And in Idaho, to have more than 30,000 people call and leave messages for our governor to veto this travesty of a bill, after tens of thousands of people had already called our legislators to ask them to vote against this bill, and for them to all just go ahead and move forward with it because they don't feel like their seats are in danger, because we have such low engagement. In my legislative district, 49% of eligible voters are registered. So that means that 51% of eligible voters aren't even registered to vote. So if you want to make a difference in your community, find out what your voter registration level is and start educating people about how important their local vote is to their lives, and start connecting what is going on at the local level in politics to what is happening in their lives. And that's where you can start making a difference.
I do want to say too that I've been talking to some local folks about voter registration drives too, and something I learned recently is she was telling me, like, yes, those are great, but what we really need is not the registration, but it's the getting them to then show up and vote in the local elections. Like, step 1 is getting them registered, but step 2 is like, there are 74 bazillion other elections that you need to vote in, more importantly than the federal one. For most of us, our federal vote doesn't matter so much.
And
Like,
I was literally telling kids, I was like, I don't care, man, go in. I was like, and educating people about the fact you can go into that voting booth and you can leave President blank if you want. You don't have to vote for either of them. Like, you don't have to do that.
In Idaho, like, it's not going to matter.
It doesn't matter. So go ahead and leave that top spot blank. You don't feel like you don't have to fill that in. But go down and vote for state legislature. Go down the list and vote for those positions, right? County commission. Go down and vote for those positions. In odd numbered years is when we have our nonpartisan and municipal elections. So a lot of it is just educating people. Hey, this year we've got city council and mayor elections happening. We just had a library board for the county seat up for grabs. And yeah, and it's like, yeah, go ahead.
I was hoping on those types of things. I know that the nonpartisan local elections are a thing that a lot of people get hung up on because it can be hard to figure out who you want to vote for. Do you have any suggestions for people on how to become better educated so that they feel like they're doing something positive in participating in that?
Yeah, and that can be really hard, right? Because you don't have that letter behind the name, which quite frankly, we'd all be better off if we didn't have the letters behind the names. It would force people to like just take 2 hours to do some research. But I think one of the things that you can do as you're researching like local candidates in that way is, first of all, most places require them to, when they've turned in their paperwork, provide contact information. So go to your county office, go to your county elections office, get the contact information for those folks and reach out to them and just say, hey, I would love to, ask you a few questions. Are you planning on holding a town hall? Are you planning on holding a meet and greet? Get it in their heads that they need to meet with people, right? Start your own organization. If you're not interested in joining like a political party or whatever, like be involved with something like your soup kitchen or your animal shelter or some kind of group that you're interested in, and then get those people that you know from that group to come with you and say, hey, let's find out whether the city councilor supports our no kill shelter, right? That's something that you're excited about. If you're part of your local conservation voters, if you're part of a local environmental group, hey, let's go to the county elections office. Let's find out the contact information for our candidates and invite them to a meet and greet where we can ask all of the candidates questions related to this issue that matters to us and this group that we're a part of. So even if it's a nonpartisan group, and we've done that before where we've had meetings as a soup kitchen board with folks that are running for school board. Hey, let's have a meet and greet with the candidates running for school board and ask them about like what their plans are for the summer feeding program for kids, right? It ties into this issue for the soup kitchen. It's an important issue and it lets you talk to these elected officials and learn about what's going on. So like there's ways to do that, to reach out to them. And when constituents start demanding that their candidates, I mean, that's part of the reason why we have Roe versus Wade overturned, right? Because a bunch of, not necessarily Republican, but a bunch of far right Christian evangelicals required every single Republican running for office to take a stance on abortion, right? Like all through the 90s and early aughts, that's what they did. Everybody had to take a stance on abortion during the primary. And then once you got out there, they would scare the Democrats from talking about abortion because they don't want to talk about being pro-choice because these guys are out here pressing them for information. Well, we can do that ourselves at the local level, the same way that the right has done through nonpartisan groups and say, hey, these are important issues that affect us. Let's invite the candidates. Let's find out who the candidates are and invite them to a meet and greet and get their thoughts on these important issues.
So, this is the part that really gets me, is that this isn't like something that brand new showed up with our current whatever in chief. This isn't new. Like this has been like decades and decades in the making, which is also like, okay, we're in 2025. We are in a very scary place right now. Like, how do we, I know none of us really have this answer, but it's like, how do we keep going? How do we not give up? How do we try and protect our local communities even as much as we can? You know, I refuse to accept that we're just screwed and there's nothing we can do. As much as, might feel pretty doomy a lot of the time, kind of like with climate change, like I still show up and I still think that like a better future is still possible, even in the midst of this last week.
Yeah, and I think holding on to that hope is hugely important. I mostly I'm a I I'm trying to remember that term again. I think active nihilist. Like where I don't believe that it's actually going to matter here, and I don't believe that we make it out of this with our republic such as it is
Uh,
intact.
Here, everyone. The
Oh,
yeah,
optimistic nihilist. I have
yeah,
some of those
optimistic
those
nihilist.
stickers. I
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
show it.
but
But
yeah, she's
but
got a
there's
sticker.
yes, we love that. But there's something in me that says, okay, we have to try. And we have to say that we fought. And we have to say that we're building resilient community where we are. And so I think that's what's important and why I stress so much local connection and also community online now that we have,
Oh,
yeah, hello?
there we
Okay.
go.
But now that we have the ability to connect online, building these communities online, I think is very hopeful and helpful as well. But I think a lot of it does go back to, are you building resilient communities at home? Who do you have in your network? Who do you have in your network that you can work with, that you can go to for support? Um, Mutual aid. I'm starting to dabble a little bit in mutual aid. Like Angela has been very helpful with me and like directing me into like resources and how to move forward and working on mutual aid. And so we've started a little mutual aid group and a little mutual aid fund here in Idaho Falls. And I think part of it is just saying like, hey, we may have to go through really tough times. And the only way to get through this is to make sure that we have support systems and communities in place. And whether, and there has to be a combination of our local communities, like where we live in real life, whatever, and then also our online communities and make sure that we're connecting online and finding support online, and whether that's emotional support, helping each other with a little bit of financial support, and providing that, right? So I think that's the most important thing is building community and connection with people, and finding out who in your networks and who in your communities have different skills that will serve you all, well, and different things that you can do to help each other, right? We've got folks like in our mutual aid network who are like good with tools and can be handy people. And, people come to me a lot about like, oh, well, how do we prepare our finances? And it's just like, well, I'm a financial nihilist now. Like, because I'm like, well, I'm just sticking to my plan and not making any changes because our entire system is set up to support the stock market and support a stock market recovery. So I'm sticking to my plan because if we figure it out and we get through this intact, then sticking to my plan is the best defense I can do for my money. If we don't, then the concept of money and what is money doesn't matter. So if we get to the point where we're not supporting the stock market as a society and as a financial system, then money as a concept is a moot point. So and then it won't matter anyway. So I'm just kind of like, oh, let's stick with the plan. But as far as finding that hope, it really is a lot of it really is being active in your community, making those connections, finding places where you can have like-minded people, which is one of the reasons why I recommend to people, if you don't want to get involved in a major political party, get involved in a local organization that deals with issues or causes that are dear to your heart, right? I got a local friend of mine was like, what do I do? I love animals. I love advocating for animals and I want to be involved and do that. And I was like, great, let me introduce you to the direct executive director of our animal shelter. I know they're looking for a board member. Why don't you get involved with that? And like, I've put people toward like the Friends of the Library who, because they're very, people who are very passionate about libraries and public library spaces. And so, okay, go get involved with your library. find your friends at the library, and then you're going to find people who are, yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm at the
Not the
library
library. We're
here
at the library
traveling,
right now.
but some other ones, like I'm in a really small town and we don't have a lot of those things just because it's so small and I don't want to drive 40 minutes to go do things. But I just joined my local Lions Club. And
Yeah.
even though I think a lot of these people probably skew politically different than me, especially some of the older folks, the way that they're showing up and the grants that they're issuing and all of these other things are arguably very progressive types of things. So it's a good way to get keyed in on what the needs are in the community. So I think sometimes you can also look to some of those that may not be as obvious or may not feel like they fit your age demographic, and at least try and see what opportunities there are.
And I think so. One of the things that I have really found that I enjoy here in my local community is we have we have wide age groups, right? Multi-generational friend groups right now here in my area, mostly because I'm in a very conservative area. I'm in a very Mormon area. 48% of Idaho Falls is demographically LDS. And I grew up that way. I don't do that anymore. But so by necessity, our friend groups are multi-generational because that's like you just you're just connecting with people. You're just connecting with people who are like-minded. And so yeah, so the oldest person in our friend group is the same age as my dad. He's going to be 71 this year. And the youngest person in our friend group is my son. So who's in his early 20s. And so, like, we have these multi-generational friend groups, and I think that's great that you're doing that, Regina, with like the Lions Club. And there are other organizations. Check to see if your town has a Civitans, a Rotary. I joined our Elks Club. That helps you meet folks, and like Regina said, sometimes the people themselves may not align with you politically, but a lot of them give out scholarships, and you can influence who is getting that scholarship. You can influence who's getting that scholarship. You can influence what kinds of scholarships they're giving out. You can influence what kind of service projects they do. You can influence all of that stuff and say, oh, hey, like we should sponsor a park in this green space. Oh, have we thought about like supporting the school, like the summer feeding program, right? So like you can do that in these groups you belong to, and they're supposed to be service organizations. So join them and steer them, like help steer them. Bring a friend and really help steer them.
And that's the thing, is a lot of these groups, and also like your local city councils, your local Kiwanis club, your local whatever, most of these groups are very, very small. So it only takes a couple of people that are like
Yeah.
showing up regularly to actually make a difference. Like when, we talk about stuff going on at the federal level, tomorrow is like the No King's Day protests. Like I think all three of us are going to be at one in different places. But, you know, you're just one little dot there. That dot matters. We still need to show up for our like federal government situation, but you're going to have a heck of a lot more input and influence when you're talking a small radius. And, with people that you're not going to align with on a lot of stuff, which I think is still really important, even with that 32% of folks that are locked in and, on this ride in a happy way. It's still important to connect with them in your local community, which is really hard sometimes, but, community resiliency does not look like different groups of people in our local community that are separately resilient. Like if we're going to be resilient locally, like we have to do it all together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very important point. It is very easy when we're existing online, which pretty much all of us who are here today are doing that in some respect, to find people who we feel very aligned with in lots of ways. But the more I get involved with various people out in the community and even friends that I have, there's a lot of people who it's upbringing, it's culture, it's rhetoric. A lot of them are not really thinking deeply about the things that they say they value and represent. And sometimes the way they show up in life is very different than how they may actually be voting. So I find that that is a helpful way to bridge some of those gaps and find who those potential allies are and see how people do show up. And then, if they're amenable to conversations, those can also be ways to work on building some bridges and maybe educating and potentially changing some minds too.
Yeah, and I think too, one of the things that I do like about showing up at things like the No Kings actions and these kinds of protests and rallies and everything is that it does help you find other people in the community who are showing up. And it's a nice community building exercise. Um, and then it also helps people feel less alone. And so even in we had a it was really cute. There's this place up in northern Idaho called 4th of July Pass. And it's just fairly remote, and there are very few people that live up there. But there were like 10 people that showed up at the top of the pass for the last hands off rally or whatever. And, they had their little signs and, they, they took pictures and sent them off to the rest of us in the state so that we could see. And they loved it. 10 people showed up and, some of them were new to each other. And so that's like a huge thing to keep things going. And then it also shows the unengaged in the community that there are people who care. It can raise visibility and awareness of what's going on. We always try to have at ours, I help coordinate a voter registration table, a voter information table, a know your rights. We put know your rights information out there. We put information on the state legislature, what the legislature has done. Um, and then we put volunteer opportunities for organizations. Hey, I mean, I keep saying the soup kitchen, that's because I'm on the board, but like, we're just like, hey, like, here are some different opportunities, scan this code and volunteer at the YMCA if you're interested in affordable childcare. Like, scan the code and volunteer, get a team together for the soup kitchen. Like, so we also put those kinds of opportunities in there. And then um, we also do a scan where they can go sign up for our newsletter. We're pretty much the only place, like I've made it a point to like make sure our calendar, we have an online calendar for the Democrats, but I make it a point to put everything that's liberal, progressive, or left that's happening on that calendar so that people can look at it. Like there's a gal that does a coffee and community 2 Saturdays a month. And so we put that on the calendar so that people who want to go find community with like-minded folks can go to her coffee and community. We have a group called Drinking Liberally. Um, they drive me insane. I try and go every 6 weeks. So yeah.
I do want to say I see what Jesse's
Yeah, I was just
talking about in the comments about how many people will show up to Hands Off or No Kings or another protest, and they think differently about affordable housing and bike lanes and parking. And it is a really good reminder that, like, big picture, we are on the same side of the like big, let's like keep it so we continue to have a country. Um, which is really easy to forget sometimes when, I'm coming off another public hearing from last night where I'm on the planning commission. And, there are people that get real angry at me. And then I've seen them at Saturday protests. And it's a really good reminder, like, hey, we don't agree on a lot of stuff, but if we want to continue to be able to disagree about that stuff, we got to make sure that we are aligned at the top.
Yep, 100%. So yeah, so I mean, but just getting started with that and finding those groups. And if you don't know, if you can't find one in your area, start one. And maybe you're the only person at your coffee and community thing for 2 or 3 weeks, but eventually, like eventually, you'll start connecting with folks. And I think that's part of what we really need to do is get back to that kind of personal connection. We've seen a lot of folks, bemoaning the fact that we are so disconnected in our society, right? Membership in fraternal organizations like the Elks, and service organizations like the Lions Club is down, over time compared to decades ago. And we're not connecting like we could be. And so I think turning that back into community connection is where we find the hope, where we start making a difference. And then encouraging people to show up the same way the extreme right. And I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Like it took us 40 years to get to this point. Like 6 months, and as much as I love that we're doing these No Kings protests and we're going, showing up for 6 months and waving signs on the Broadway Bridge is not going to fix this. Like, unfortunately, there's a lot of unsexy work that has to be done. And we have to start engaging in our communities and helping our fellow community members see how important it is for them to engage as well.
And I would also say that when you're talking about how a lot of these organizations have lost membership and people are not engaging in community like they used to, like, again, when we talk about capitalism, you know, so much of the things that we used to just do for each other are now monetized. I mean, things like in my neighborhood, people actually mow each other's lawns, especially like for the like older single folks, just because it's part of community.
Right.
Instead of like, we don't always need to hire a landscaper. We don't always have to hire an Uber driver to get us to the airport. Like, if your kid needs somebody to like keep an eye out for 2 hours, maybe there's a neighbor. Like, so much of this stuff used to be just we showed up for each other. And again, this has been the work of like this century of, tearing those ties apart and instead putting dollars on them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And I have to, we've heard about it in so many places, things like Facebook, and the way that we have increased the feelings of polarization with people. Getting into those in-person spaces can really help to combat that a lot, because I also think people do not show up in real life the way they do online. It is a very different situation, and it can be yeah, just incredibly helpful. And I have a feeling, especially a lot of us that are the online people, some of us do not connect as easily in person. That's why we love being online. But that's why I like things like service organizations or your animal shelter, because it gives you a ready-made purpose and way to show up. And for a lot of us, we just need that anchor point to find a way to begin to get involved. You don't have to do everything, just find one thing that you're interested and willing to show up for. And once you put yourself out there, like lots of things, it seems like there's a lot of opportunity because need and interest is there. You just have to get dialed in and connected with what it is.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. And, when we're talking about like capitalism and how wages don't keep up with everything, like one of the things that, we're trying to work on too is how do we provide some sort of childcare at some of our events? How do we get some folks involved in that? Because some of these barriers, right? And one of the things I also say is our current system, right, is set up to make it difficult to engage. Thomas Jefferson, whatever, problematic. But he did say that, for a functioning democracy, you need an educated and engaged, basically an educated, engaged citizenry. He said that people, and of course we know what he meant by people, but but he said that people needed sufficient leisure and time to be able to be educated and engaged. And our current late stage capitalistic hellhole does not allow that for us very well, right? Like, right, we're all out here, if you happen to have two adults in your home, you're both working to survive. If you happen to have children, now you've got to help them with the homework. You got to get into soccer practice. You got to go to the school play. You got to go to like you got to do all this stuff. When are you going to have time to know what's going on or volunteer in a community? And so I always encourage people to start with finding 1 to 2 hours a week where they can say like, all right, I'm going to learn about this one thing in my community. I'm going to learn about this one issue that is affecting my community. I am going to set aside 1 hour this week to go to a city council meeting and like see what's going on. But if you can find 1 or 2 hours to just carve out of that, it's a way to start. But yeah, like you said, Sarah, like when you're struggling to survive, you don't have that capacity. And so you really have to scale down and do what you can.
Yeah. And that's why the three of us are money nerds. Like, because we understand that we are in this place. And when you are struggling to survive, when you just have to make sure that you have enough money to like keep a roof over your head and food in your stomach and maybe occasionally get to go to the doctor, you don't have
No
time to
time.
think bigger picture. And so like when, the three of us are all very much deeply involved in, financial independence and just like talking and understanding and doing the money stuff, it's because we want people to be able to have space for other stuff. And as long as we live in this late stage capitalist hellhole, we have to understand that you got to figure out the money stuff so you can do the other stuff.
And once again, and just like we talk about, right, all the time, like your little things like move $10 to savings or whatever, like that we see you post, right? You know what? Like your 1 hour looking at issues doesn't have to be all together, right? Today, take 10 minutes to find out, take 10 minutes to call the county elections office and ask them who is running for city council this year. And then get there and get that contact information, right? So same kind of approach, right? Um, move 10 minutes, move $10 into your savings, and then take 10 minutes to find out something that's going on in your community that you can get involved with.
And everybody who is here listening today, you have resources and opportunity with the spaces that we have with WPF. It is great if you are somebody who is wanting to do more but feeling uncomfortable to have hundreds of people who are maybe trying to do similar things that you can come talk to online. I know one of the things that's a non-starter for a lot of people is it can be great to feel like you want to go do something in person and have an idea, but if you don't have that larger support network to be able to come back to and ask questions or express that you're let down, it can be hard to get those things going. So, of course, you're here and we're going to talk about our space, but that doesn't really matter what it is. If you have a space that you enjoy and can show up online, if you are one of those blue dots in a red state, finding some supportive spaces with people from far away can be really important for helping you to be able to develop more of those skills and feel comfortable being your little nucleation point locally to get some things done, and being okay if maybe it is slow and it's not big, but just that you have some support. So by all means, recommend us if you want, find other places, look for local organizations, and you're happier online, see if they need a bigger online presence, for example. A lot of places need help with that kind of thing too, especially like the organizations that are represented by a lot of older people. They may not have good web presence or social media presence. And if you're willing to be somebody who can step in and help with some of that stuff, you might be able to help bring in more people for that type of cause too.
And WPF is all over the country and the world. And like odds are, I don't care like where you are in the country, how deep red your dot is. Odds are there is someone connected in the WPF community that lives within an hour of you. And maybe that's one person that you meet and connect with in real life that at least you're aligned with, and it can be a start to something. Like I pretty much guarantee, like I think it would be hard to find somebody in the US that is not within an hour drive of somebody else in WPF.
Miranda, we're coming up on the 2:30 mark. Do you have time for us to open up the floor to some questions?
Um,
Or
Like
what's your hard
5
stop?
minutes?
yeah, I could do 5 minutes.
Okay, all right. So let's do that. Does anybody have any questions for Miranda? You can come on camera if you like, or drop them in the chat, or comments, questions or comments.
Yeah. And just want to say I appreciate everybody who's like already here and understands the soapbox of the money stuff, because I feel like that is a really hard thing to talk about, especially like the further left you go into spaces. People want to talk about, they don't want to talk about money. They don't want to pretend money matters. But we are existing in a society where it does. And so the more that we can get people solid, the more power we have.
And since we don't have a question, I'll point out a conversation me and Angela.
I just
Oh,
got
we
a
do have
text.
one.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say I'm good now. I don't have a hard stop now. I just got a text from my next meeting to say that they need to cancel. So
All
hooray!
All
right.
right. Well, I will address my quick point, and then we do have a question from Sarah. One thing me and Angela noted in a conversation this week is also that kind of like the deeper you get, the easier it is to feel like you're not doing enough. The way Angela put it on her Threads post was like, it's easy to feel radical when you're with a lot of people who aren't doing anything. So keep that in mind too if you're somebody who is showing up, but it's easy to consistently feel like you're not doing enough as you engage more with other people who are active. Don't let that, get you down. I would say take that as a good sign that you're getting into some deep places. And that is definitely something we have to remind ourselves of too when we're people who are online and see everything that's going on is it can definitely be overwhelming. So yeah, thank you for showing up, and we're glad you're here today. So Sarah asked, any suggested resources for integrating community building into political engagement?
Yeah, so I'm trying to see if I can find this thing. Let's see. I think I mean a lot of it goes back to excuse me. Goes back to just showing up and making sure that that you are letting people know like, hey, when you are engaging with community, saying like, hey, like let's get together here and all like let's vote together, let's get rides arranged. And part of it is just like shifting from like, oh, community engagement. Yep, we're involved as a community, we're hanging out, we're talking about things that matter to us. Okay, now let's make sure that we're helping each other remind, hey, this election's coming up. Hey, this is an issue that matters to us, and this is an official that could get behind us. So I do find, let's see here. Let's see. The Urban Institute has a toolkit that I think is useful. It's the one I was thinking about.
I'll drop it also in Woven and Insiders Discord later too, so that people can find it.
Yeah, it has a lot of interesting things about like building community partnerships. It talks about, making sure that we're compensating community partners. One of the things I like this compensation piece. One of the things that I mean, I do a lot for free, but one of the things that I make sure I do is when I invite somebody from a marginalized community to speak with a group that I'm involved with, we pay them. Like we pay them. And we just pay them. We make sure that they are paid. I think that's important as well. So yeah, I think that that's a good one. And then I do like this guide to community engagement is a good one as well.
And we have another question, Miranda,
That Angela
about
will not be answering because Angela does not have an answer to that question.
how do you define boundaries? Because this work is endless, and when it involves local community, it can be difficult to have boundaries. And I think there was an extension of that said something to the effect of like, yeah, yes, it's easy to be to kind of let this all take over. Like there's once you start recognizing what the needs are,
Yeah.
it doesn't stop.
Yeah, so one of the things that I have managed to do, start doing is just being like, and this actually in January, I had, um, people were like, 'cause I just kind of like after this last election season and after November, I just sort of fucked off for 2 months. I was just like,
Is this
no,
when you were traveling and doing things?
no, so
Oh,
no, I just stayed home and just was just like, I am making bread and I am not doing anything. Don't ask me to. And and I think part of that is just saying, you know what? No. And then also recognizing that either somebody else will step up or they won't. One of the things that I did have to recognize was, so there were a lot of places that were doing people's marches in January, and um and somebody was like, why didn't we have one in Idaho Falls? And I'm like, because nobody planned one, because I didn't.
Mm.
And sometimes, and part of that process of me fucking off for 2 months was coming to peace with the idea that sometimes it's not going to get done because you didn't do it. And it's okay because you need rest so that you can do the next thing. And not having a People's March in Idaho Falls, not the end of the world. It's just not the end of the world. And so I think a lot of that and defining my boundaries comes down to saying, I need rest, I need hydration, and then scheduling that in. And one of the things I started doing, it sounds really silly, but I started saying, you know what, I am going to, I there, this is trivia night. I am playing trivia tonight. And if you are going to hold your little meeting or your little like thing on trivia night, I will not be there because I'm going to trivia night. And it seems silly. But like it's a thing that I do to relax. It's a thing that I do to hang out with my friends. It's a thing that I do that is fun and that helps me like recharge. And yeah, and there are times when I just straight up just say, no, I'm not doing that. And it's hard. It really is hard at first, especially if you're somebody who likes to be involved. And especially if you're somebody who is really passionate about something, it is hard to step back and find that peace to say, okay, it may not get done. Um, yeah, and sometimes, yeah, and sometimes, it helps people learn what they need. And my focus on mentoring these young people and helping them, and I've been facilitating our Idaho ACLU and then a group in Pocatello have been doing Know Your Rights trainings. And I encouraged them, I said, hey, can you put them on Zoom and then have people from the state host them so that people around the state can see it and we all don't have to put a bunch of separate trainings on. And it's been very useful for us. I just get a room at the library, we project it up onto the screen. We watch the training and then we can talk about local issues after regarding the training. And that also helps with the cross training too, is connecting with people in your communities or communities around the state. We have the technology that I don't have to try and get somebody to come do a protest, know your rights protest training, which we did. Our first one was protest training in February, so that once we were getting ready for all of these actions, everybody had their know your rights protest stuff.
okay. I'm going to interrupt you real quick and request that we get that somehow. Can you help facilitate us figuring out how to do that for the WPF audience? We can
Sure.
pinpoint, we can put a pin in that, but I think that would be appreciated. So,
Yeah, we can definitely put a pin in that. Yes. Let me know. We can definitely work on coordinating that. But yeah, I think that's a good point. Like if we are working on and that's the other thing I do too is like I don't want to make myself so necessary
mm,
that that nothing's happening. I'm making sure like learning to delegate and learning to say, hey, will you help me with this thing? And asking people in my community to help with things. And hey, because you might be surprised like that some people want to help, but they don't know what's needed. And so if you just give them something to do, then they're happy to do it as well. So that's another way that you can do boundaries and step back a little bit is by reaching out. And like I said, you do have to come to peace with the idea that maybe a ball gets dropped, maybe a thing doesn't get done. And sometimes that's just the way it is. and and you
And you
just
should maybe plan for that and like do it on purpose occasionally, even if you do have everything together, just to force people to be aware that they do need to fill those gaps. Don't just make it be when you're stressed out.
yeah, exactly. And I have like over time I have learned to schedule in rest and rejuvenation for myself without reaching the point of complete breakdown. So we're working on it. You know, we're working on making sure that I schedule those things into my life and I build my life around me. And I do have to acknowledge I have a lot of privilege in this area because I do make good money. I do work from home. My son is a grown ass adult. So like, you know, the things that I do now, I cannot have done while my son was younger, right? So I think part of that too is just bye Regina. Part of that too is just recognizing that like there are times in your life that you can't like do as much as you would like to do, and that's okay. Do what you can, and if you need rest, take that rest. Um, the work will still be there.
Yeah. I think that's probably a good time to jump off too, because I have to go do school pickup.
Yay!
So speaking of sons that are not grown ass adults yet, Regina and I both have one of those. So, but it was wonderful. As wonderful as, you know, talking about doom can be.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you
Yep.
again, Miranda.
Yeah,
And
thank you
thank you
guys.
everybody for coming today.
Thanks everyone. I hope I was helpful.